There's only 2 slides to this screencast. There's quite a bit of information on each one, and I'm going to show the full information and not be clicking through, outlining. Oh, fucking hell. There's only 2 slides to this screencast. I'm showing all the information on each slide in one go, because that way you can look at it holistically overall, if you like, and make sure that you understand what each of the terms mean and how they work as a system. So if we look at the core facilitation practices, this is a summary of the key skills, if you like, facilitation practices. The ones in black I'm going to say a little bit more about, because they are very central to doing very well. All of it needs to be done well, but these are areas that I want to emphasize. The one in red, managing information, is a key practice, but in the next slide we're going to look at what that means. So that's a bit of an advanced organizer. Now, quick thinking, some people are quicker thinking than others, aren't they? And that's probably true. It's the ability to process information very quickly in your mind, see what's going on, make sense of it, and make some decision in terms of actual action, interaction with the group to move the process forward. It's a very high level skill and one that can be developed over time. Now, sensory acuity, that's the psychological term. What it basically means is you've got to be very observant to what's going on. So good looking around the group, listening, try to read the mood, see if people are engaged, disengaged, and where necessary, do some quick thinking and be able to change it in more productive ways. Staying neutral, well, we know in facilitation sometimes it's not about fact, it's about beliefs, it's about perception, and people may have emotional connections to these things. So as the facilitator, you need to stay neutral. It's not your job to come in and say, well, I believe this and you lot are wrong. And equally, if people are expressing opinions as fact, you need to test those assumptions, and you'll see that's the key skill. So again, it's essential to pick up where there are value-laden issues and ensure that there is a justification for people's positions, and that fact is brought to the surface. It's then up to people then to choose what they want to go with. Staying on track, well, I've got to do that here, haven't I, because I can't make this too long. Sometimes in facilitation, issues emerge, people have a strong interest, and you might think, well, I need to go down this track for a while. Yes, that's fine, but you've got to make a judgment call about what tracks you go in and how long you stay down those tracks. Empathic listening, well, now what's the difference between that and normal listening? Well, nothing really. It's good listening, and that's where that we really consciously pay attention to what people are saying and what they're not saying, their body language, and being prepared to show that we're listening as a visual thing. In other words, we look at that person, we give them some feedback that we're listening, maybe a nod or yeah, okay, whatever. But it's not just simply you're listening, you've got to show that you're listening. Now, asking questions, massive skill in facilitation. It's a key skill. You've got to be able to ask the right questions in the right way as well as answer them. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail later. Paraphrasing, well, sometimes people don't always express themselves clearly, and you've got to do a bit of scaffolding. Bit of quick thinking here to try to put it back to the person and say, well, is this what you mean? Is this a representation of the position that you're taking? Testing assumptions we mentioned, and again, that's being able to say to people, look, you know, you're saying this, and you're presenting this viewpoint, what's the basis of it? So that way you can bring up factual data that may or may not be validated, but also the kind of underlying assumptions, premises, belief systems that are involved. Now, making meaning, why have I highlighted that? Because that really is a high-level skill, in my opinion. And what that means is that as you're facilitating, information's flying around, and you've got to be doing that quick thinking, managing that information, which we're going to look at a little bit later, and making connections with the group by saying, so-and-so said this, this has been said, previously we said that. Are these things connected? Is there a set of understandings behind this? Is there a perspective? What inferences, interpretations can we make? Okay, giving and receiving feedback, massively important in learning, as we know that feedback is tremendously important. It's important, therefore, that you're able to give feedback. So at particular points, you might say, it looks like the group feel this way, or it looks like the group perhaps are moving in this direction. And that's because of this. Is that how you see it? So you're giving them feedback, but equally you are processing their feedback all the time in order to make meaning and move the facilitation process along. And that's very much connected to providing summaries, because as you provide summaries at the end of a particular area, what you're doing is giving feedback to the group. You've got to make decisions when to make summaries, but the important thing is that if a particular area has been fully explored, you might say, okay, well, I think we've got a frame on this. We're now going to move on to this. So it often happens at points of transition. Managing information, well, it's a biggie. You've got a big facilitation group. There's lots of information flying around. You've got to process it. You've got to make meaning. And one of the ways we do that is through what's called process tools. Okay, so a process tool, quite simply, if you look at the quote at the bottom first, it's simply a chart, a graph, it's words, it's lists, organized around circles, boxes, graphs, and pictures. And what they actually do is to bring together ideas that we can then, in an organized manner, reflect on, talk about, do some thinking, make some interpretations, inferences, and then make some decisions. So a big task of good facilitation is to manage this information, which may start right at the beginning of the session and it can go on and on. In a large facilitation session, you might use a number of these tools that may stay as posters on the wall, and periodically you will go back with the group and you'll look at previous products of the dialogue that you're having and start to connect things together. You're making meaning. So making meaning and managing information and good thinking, you can start to see are ongoing synergistic, there's a nice word, purposes. The important thing to recognize is different types of tools can be used for different purposes. You're probably familiar with mind mapping. That's very good for organizing information in one kind of graphic, generating new ideas, more creative type thinking tool, brainstorming, and again, mind mapping can be used for that. Group decision making, there's a couple of tools there. I'll say a bit about individual tools later, and some of you may be familiar with Edward de Bono's famous thinking hats, which is good for managing different perspectives in a group and also for dealing with conflict, because that often will happen on value-laden issues. So this is your introduction to the key facilitation practices and the use of facilitation or process tools, which are the real nuts and bolts, the key concepts of facilitation. Simply knowing about them doesn't mean that you can use them effectively, though.